Director of Senior and Disability Action. And the Organizers Forum, for folks who don't know, is designed to expand and support community organizing in disability communities. I'm also going to ask our co-hosts to help, I think you're on it, to stop folks' video as they come in. Great. And I'm going to do that as well. Okay. So yeah, the Organizers Forum is really about supporting disability organizers. We know this work can sometimes be lonely. We know we have a lot of work to do to mobilize disabled folks. And we know we have a lot of work to do in terms of disability organizing in making sure that, that we are centering the voices of those most marginalized, not just white disabled people in wheelchairs, right? But Black, Indigenous, people of color, people with non-apparent disabilities, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, et cetera. So a lot of that is for us to be able to come together and figure out, what does that work look like? How do we support each other to do that? So the Organizers Forum is a project of the National Disability Leadership Alliance, and thanks to them for funding the captioning.
You just went on mute, Jessica.
Sorry, so someone muted me accidentally. Okay. So Senior and Disability Action funds the captioning, the interpreting, excuse me, and we have started to put the recordings and transcripts up on our website, which is sdaction.org. I apologize, it often takes us a while to get them in the right format and get them up, but you can look there for past recordings. So thanks for those who are introducing themselves in the chat. Please share your name, your pronouns, your city and state, and anything else about what brought you here. We do a different topic each month, and we're always looking for ideas. So feel free to share those with me. And my email is in the email announcement that you should have gotten, or you can put ideas in the chat. So the format for today is we will introduce our amazing panelists. I'm so honored to have these folks with us today. We will have a discussion. We're going to keep everyone muted and off video during that time. And then the last 20 minutes or so, we will open it up for question and answer and broader discussion. If you're on the phone, remember to use *6 to mute and unmute yourself. I also want to let people know, unfortunately, the Yahoo group listserv has ended. So if you have filled out the RSVP form, the Google form in the email announcement, we will add you to the Google listserv as soon as possible. So please be sure to fill that out if you haven't yet. Oh, the other way we are working to continue this conversation is through Facebook. So check out Organizers Forum on Facebook, please like it, and then make comments there, right? For all the folks that aren't here, you can share key quotes that you heard that were really powerful. So today, unfortunately, I have to step away a little bit into another meeting. And so I'm delighted to have a co-facilitator, Allie Cannington, who works for the Kelsey and is well known in disability communities. I do want to acknowledge, though, that it is not ideal that we have two white co-facilitators, which is far from representative of the disability community. And so that's definitely work that I'm doing, and I think we need to do in the Organizers Forum. And I also want to put out a call for Black, Brown, Indigenous, people of color, disability organizers who may be on this call, or some of you may know, who may be interested in playing more of a role in the Organizers Forum. I would love to talk to you and figure out how we can make that happen. And I also want to put out a call for organizations that have been involved, is that we need to figure out how we can fund this better so that we can provide honoraria to folks to make sure that it's equitable and allows folks to join. So on that note, I just want to very quickly introduce our three speakers, and then I'll introduce Allie to lead the panel. So today's topic is the state of disability organizing. And this is something that we often do with the Organizers Forum at the beginning of the year, to get key leaders in disability communities to kind of reflect on how are we doing? How much power have we built? Can we actually make things happen? Are we reaching the grassroots? Are people engaged? What issues are we taking on? What should we be looking at? And so this isn't so much a policy conversation, but a conversation about how are we doing in terms of our organizing. And so our three speakers who I keep alluding to, building the suspense, we have Karen Tamley, who's the relatively new director of Access Living, stepping into the large shoes of the late Marka Bristow. But Karen is sure to bring some wonderful energy to that work. We have Andraea LaVant from LaVant Consulting, who I think a lot of folks know from the Crip Camp series this past summer. And then Julia Bascom, who is the director of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, really doing some incredible work there. So on that note, Allie will let me know if I missed anything, but I will go ahead and turn it over to her to start off the panel.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. My name is Allie. I use they, them pronouns, and a brief image description of me is that I'm a white, femme-ish presenting person with brown short hair and blue glasses and a nose ring and lip ring. I am just behind a white wall. And so I am really pleased to be in conversation with three comrades in disability, community, and movement work. And just because of time, I hope it's okay that I'm going to skip over kind of reading the in-depth bios and just jump right to conversation with y'all. And what we can do is we can make sure that Jessica can send out your bios to everyone so that everyone can read up on all the incredible work that you're doing. Also, the first time you share, if you could also share to Karen, Andraea, and Julia, if you could share your gender pronouns as well as a brief image description. I also just wanted to, as someone who is still every day learning about what really organizing means and what it feels like and what it looks like, I wanted to ground us in a few things. One is there's going to be a lot of unfinished business today. This is a continuous conversation that needs to be grounded in action and building relationships with one another as disabled people. And then really there's a difference between organizing and advocacy. And the difference is that organizing is when people impacted by a problem come together to create collective action. That action changes the power dynamic so that we can get someone who typically has the power to give us what we want so that we can have the real change in our lives. Advocacy is really when still very important, but it can often look like an individual speaking on behalf of a large group. And it's often in the form of like educating people with power. They're interrelated, of course, but organizing is distinct because it really, really talks about and puts into action who has the power and shifts it to those who are feeling and experiencing oppression at the deepest levels. And so with that, I want to just, jump into it. So today's topic is the state of disability organizing. And how do we measure the state of disability organizing? Who wants to start? Karen, can I ask you to give us your take? How do we measure the state of disability organizing? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll just say that, you know, even though I'm now the CEO of Access Living, and I most recently spent 14 years in government as the commissioner for the mayor's office for people with disabilities, my roots are really in community organizing, mostly through ADAPT and working at Centers for Independent Living, and particularly in the areas of community-based services and housing. You know, for me, community organizing was transformational to my own identity as a disabled person. And, you know, I'll tell you a little bit more about that. I really started my career out as an intern in Washington, D.C., and I worked for a disability rights attorney. And he sent me on my first ADAPT action way back in 1990. And I had no idea what it was. I didn't know much about community organizing or its power. And I ended up getting arrested, and it was a transformational, life-changing experience for me. It really taught me personally about the power of myself as an individual to create change, and the collective power of our community to create change and dismantle ableist systems. And so, you know, it's a tool in the toolbox that I think is the most essential change-making tool of our community. And I've seen that also just in my role in government, how critical community organizing was to help me get things accomplished, because it allowed the voices of a diverse set of folks with disabilities with lived experience to come forward with, this is how this particular issue or this policy is impacting my life. And so I don't feel that I would have been as successful as I was in government without the role of activists and community organizing. So that's just kind of like a baseline, but I think community organizing now has just taken so many different forms from when I started back in the 90s, where it was very physical, putting your body on the line, to now evolving, particularly during the pandemic, into the digital space and social media. And I think it's made organizing more accessible in many ways for more people. Although there are still digital barriers, many digital divide barriers that our community faces. But I think it's taken on a new form, and that I think has been really impactful in many different ways. I will also just say that I think, the disability community, the power of the disability community has evolved over many years. Never would I thought, for example, that every Democratic presidential candidate would have some form of a disability platform. And I recently served on the Biden-Harris transition team and really saw the impact and the power of the disability community. I think so much of it got to where it was because of powerful community organizing over the last many decades. I have kind of more reflections just as a CEO and just what I see as community organizing, but I would like maybe some other of my co-panelists to be able to say a few words.
Thanks so much, Karen. Andrea, can I move to you? How do you measure the state of disability organizing? What does that even, how do we measure it? What does it mean?
That's a heavy question. I'm Andraea. I'm thrilled to be here with my image description here. I am in my very festive living room with a bunch of Valentine-like decorations, because why not, behind me. And I'm wearing a yellow shirt. It's one of my favorite. If you all followed Crip Camp, it's one of my favorite. It says disability is an intersection and has a bunch of different folks, some visibly disabled, some not. I am wearing purple tassel earrings and lipstick and orange and tan cat eye glasses with the funky little shape. My hair is about shoulder length and curly, and I've got a deep caramely skin, and my purple nails. And I use she, her pronouns. Um, how do we measure the state of disability organizing? You know, I think about it. I agree so much, you know, what Karen offered in terms of kind of the progression has been great. And I think obviously just the elevation really within the pandemic of needing to move things to virtual. And so now being seen kind of as experts, for lack of a better phrase, has been helpful. But I think that, you know, I often think about, I'm continually thinking about people that just don't have access to the resources or the knowledge. You know, I think about my experience as a, you know, pretty middle class Black disabled child. I'm a wheelchair user for those that don't know. And it was just, I mean, it wasn't the concepts around, you know, even the phrase community organizing, specifically when it comes to how disability is presented, and I'll say in the Black community in particular, like you don't even know that these concepts that, you know, the concept of disability pride and, you know, even having your needs met in that way are even a thing, right? And so I think that we still have, and I mean, I'm not young, but I think that, you know, there's still more to do around meeting people where they're at, you know, to be honest. I think just having this expectation that everybody wants to be an advocate or a, you know, but really it's just about, you know, whatever it is, whatever place people are in their disability identity, we still need to be, in essence, we all have desires, we all have needs that need to be met, we all want, you know what I mean? And so I think there's still continued work. And I think back to when I first started in working in disability over a decade ago, and I was reading No Pity because Crip Camp wasn't out yet, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I had no idea, you know, about all this history that happened. Why didn't anybody tell me? I want to be proud and out, you know, and all this. And I had my boss at the time was like, okay, hold up. Like, yes, this is your revelation, but it may not be, like, everybody's not coming with that same rah. And yet we all, you know, we all have a place in the movement. And so I think it's about us really being open to that and continuing to figure out how to reach everyone. So, yeah.
I love that. Thank you, Andrea. Julia?
Hi, I'm Julia Bascom. My pronouns are she, her. For an image description, I am a white woman with long dark hair and glasses, existing. I think that the disability community has built so much power online and politically in 2020 particularly. Like, I really want to highlight Karen's points about every major campaign having a disability platform, which just is new and is really exciting, and that a lot of people worked really, really hard on. We also saw such robust engagement on Twitter between not even campaigns, but just like different advocates in different areas and the disability community through like the Crip the Vote chat and just a lot of other forums. You know, a lot of people have been working really hard for a really long time to make that happen. And it's so great to see. And I think that as the world has shifted more online, you know, a lot of disabled advocates are like, yeah, this is where we live. This is where we've been working. Welcome, which is really great to see. At the same time, I want to sort of circle back to Andrea's point. Like, I think people are really there are some disabled people who are more isolated than ever before, especially people who don't have reliable internet access or who can't use, like, don't have the right to use the internet unsupervised, or who need people to facilitate their internet access. Like, especially I'm thinking about like people with intellectual disabilities living in group homes, just about anybody living in an institution, lots of lower income disabled people and disabled people of color who just don't have that same access. So in some ways, our community has really grown and flourished, but I think the folks who are more isolated are actually more isolated than they were prior to the pandemic and prior to this year, and that's something we need to think really seriously about. I know we're halfway through our time, and I think Karen and Andrea have given us really great thoughts. So the last thing I'll say for this question is just that I want to really highlight that disability justice leaders specifically have been at the forefront when it comes to mutual aid in a time of pandemic. Like, they've been doing this work already, but in the pandemic, they've been able to really show the rest of us what we need to be doing and thinking about, looking at the way that intersecting oppressions and different marginalizations shape how people experience the pandemic. Like, people with disabilities certainly are experiencing this pandemic differently than non-disabled people, but we're also not experiencing it all the same way. And that breaks down along, you know, different types of privilege we have access to, what our disability is like, whether we're white or a person of color, et cetera, et cetera. And those have been really important conversations. And similarly, and I think we're going to talk about this more later, but I really want to recognize that disability justice leaders have been doing the work for years, talking about disability and racism, and particularly disability and police violence. And that's a conversation that, again, our country and I think the disability community has had more this year. And I think it's just important to recognize those conversations were happening for a very long time before. And it's sort of similar to non-disabled people realizing that the world is shifting online. Like, I think a lot of white disabled people came into these conversations and were like, oh, huh. And it's important to recognize that they've been happening, you know, long before us. And it's our job to listen and learn and keep them going and not just step away when we think the world's changed again.
Yes. Thank you all so much for going deep into that question of how we measure the state of disability organizing. I know that we could talk about it for a long time, and here we are, like in 2021, and I just, you know, kind of in going with what you were sharing, Julia, and thinking about the distinct roles that racism, ableism, classism, and so many other systems of oppression impact disabled people and people differently during this pandemic. How do we envision disability organizing in 2021? What do you all want to see from yourselves, from your comrades, from the community at large?
So this is Karen. I'll just jump in. And I failed to do a description of myself. My pronouns are she, her, and I have short brown hair. I'm wearing a dark green sweater. And I'm a white woman who uses a wheelchair. So my apologies for not doing that at the outset. So Ellie, I think your question was like, how do we envision organizing in 2021?
What are the threats or opportunities for disability communities?
Yeah, so, I mean, at least for me, as the director of SCIL, my mission has become so much more clear as a result of the pandemic. Because as we all know, and has been said before, it's exposed the disparities that our community has long faced. So I am looking at this from a perspective of really surfacing and highlighting and tackling those disparities that have been exposed, some of which have been mentioned, you know, disparities in healthcare, you know, disparities in the digital divide has been such a huge issue for for so many people with disabilities. And Julia, I'm really glad that you brought up that as well. And I actually took some notes because some of the points you made are aligned with, you know, what we're looking at, but also I think looking at this from a different perspective too, in terms of who has the right to access technology. And, you know, I see the digital divide as a real factor in exacerbating poverty and isolation. I'm seeing it as a health equity issue, you know, because everything now is dependent on technology. And so that's just one example of how I think the state that we're in has, I guess, revealed for me the path forward around some of the areas that we need to focus on. Obviously, racial equity is such a huge issue. That's a top priority of mine at Access Living. You know, not just internally, but also externally in the work that we're doing. But what I'm also seeing is that when we're talking about equity broadly, we're not including the disability voice in that, the disability perspective. And at least in the city that I work in, there's a big effort around bringing greater equity in all aspects of our city. And nowhere is disability mentioned or that intersect between race and disability. So to me, those are just some of the things that I see for 2021. You know, I am optimistic about the path forward in some ways. I think that there is a new focus on listening and engaging to marginalized communities in a way that I have not seen before. Taking the views and listening to those with lived experience in ways that I haven't seen before, and a strong focus on race equity and leadership of organizations that are led by people of color, BIPOC communities, from a grant making standpoint that I have not seen before. So those are all things that give me hope about the coming year and the work that lies ahead. Although it, you know, there's clearly a lot of work to be done, but those are just some thoughts I have.
Thanks, Karen. And I'm just gonna put in like another seed to plant in y'all's brain as we finish. Each of you will, Julia and Andrea will share one more time, and then we'll open it up to questions. But as we think about disability organizing in 2021, two things come to my mind. One is, what is a time that you've maybe like seen or have experienced a fail? Like when things have not gone accordingly, and what lesson have you learned from that we can take into organizing in 2021? And then also relationship building with folks on the ground who we want to bring into movement work. What is your perspective on relationship building in 2021? So either Julia or Andrea, please share some of your thoughts.
Sure, this is Andrea. So I have a few things, and this may, I'm thinking of the threats. I know we can talk about opportunities, but you know, I'll be honest and say that as a Black disabled entrepreneur that, you know, also has a team of people that work with me, I am concerned that we're essentially a buzz topic, a popular word, intersectionality, like all of these things are very present because of the things that arose last year between the pandemic and you know, the visibility of racial injustice, because it wasn't like it, you know, was something new. And quite honestly, I mean, we're being tapped so frequently, and yet I'm like, and because of how, you know, things tend to roll, how long is it going to last is my question. You know, when we think about even, you know, for those of us that have worked in disability, how there's been like popular disabilities depending on the year that companies are focusing on, right? Like, and in the media and all of that stuff. And so it can feel that way if we don't really, aim to do some infrastructural, permanent, lasting work, where it's not just people coming to speak, but it's actually changing what the internal makeup of, the organizations of the, just all of the things, and access to, reaching people, young people early on, in terms of, the education. And I'm not saying education from disability, I'm saying straight up, like, if we're not prepared to be in leadership roles, right? Like, how can, if you want to say, oh, we get all the time, can you give us a recommendation for a BIPOC, disabled, whatever it may be, right? And if people don't have the access to those, to whatever it is that's going to be able to meet that need, right? Then, like, so I think that's where I think we really have to work hard to create some permanent, that it's not going to just be a buzz word, the intersectionality, the race, the switch from equality to equity to, justice. I think, one of the big mistakes really is that people are using rights and justice interchangeably. And I think we really need to be cognizant of when people are using the word disability justice, like they've just switched it over. And it's like, do you really know what that means? And who really are you, elevating there? And then to your point about kind of learnings, what we've learned a lot over the past year is that even within, thinking cross disability, we don't know everything. And like, we have to really be open, not just from a race perspective, but also cross disability perspective, to make sure that we're continually connecting with our disabled brothers and sisters to provide, to ensure collective access, so that everybody can be in a space and feel like they're meant to be there. So those are I feel like I complained the whole time, but that's my 2 cents.
Oh, speaking truth. Julia?
No, yeah, I don't think that's complaining. I think that's brilliance. I'm really enjoying being on this call with Andraea and Karen. I have a few different thoughts, so I'm going to try to go pretty quickly. I want to first to pick up on a couple of things that Andraea was saying, and then to circle back to Karen. I think that there has been some progress among like white-led disability rights organizations, and I'm very much including my organization in that, in terms of talking about racism and police violence and looking at racism in our movement and so on and so forth. But I do think there's a tremendous risk that people sort of think, okay, we've done it, we've checked that box, and don't realize that this is about like an ongoing progress of holding ourselves accountable, holding our friends accountable, changing how we do things, changing what we do. Like at ASAN, one thing that we've been thinking about a lot the past year and going into this year is we realized like we're committed to anti-racism, right? But we're often responding from a very reactive place, like something happens and we try to respond to it, as opposed to doing more proactive work in partnership with disabled people of color. So we're trying to think about like what it means to change that, what we have to restructure in order to change how we're doing things like permanently and sustainably going forward. And I think those are conversations that a lot of organizations need to have, and a lot of like individual advocates need to be asking ourselves about. I think also to the last point you raised, Andraea, I think that the disability rights movement just overall has had a long problem for a really long time around sort of like internalized or lateral ableism, and sort of like treating some people with disabilities as more valuable than people with other kinds of support needs. And that can manifest in a lot of different ways, but I think a really big one is how we treat people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Like when we talk about accessibility, we'll often talk about physical access, we might talk about interpreters or Braille, things like that. We often don't talk about like the way we talk and whether we're making information accessible, and whether like people who communicate in different ways or need more time to process are able to participate in and learn the same things that other people have access to. So that's something I also really want to challenge people to be thinking about as we head into 2021. On an issue level or a policy level, there are a few things that I'm thinking about and really looking about. So I try to take these practices, change how I do advocacy, and then apply them across this spectrum of issues. I think that, this pandemic has really showed the broader world what disabled people already knew, which is that institutions are deadly. And no one should live there. And when you send people there, you are sending them to die. And I think we really need to use this pandemic and the horrific death rates we've seen to really push that issue and really, really advocate for an end to institutionalization and to large congregate settings. I think in general, there are a lot of broader civil rights and social justice issues that are getting a lot of attention, in this year and the next few years. And we have to make sure that when the broader civil rights or a broader progressive movement is talking about those issues, that they're incorporating sort of the disability angles on them. So if we're talking about voting, we need to be also making sure that we're talking about how paper ballots can pose accessibility issues. And we need to talk about voting rights for people with disabilities under guardianship. If we're talking about economic justice or rebuilding our economy after a devastating pandemic, we should also be talking about how disabled people can still be paid the minimum wage and changing that. If we're talking about infrastructure, which is a big part of a lot of the economic recovery plans, I think that's a great opportunity to talk about how physically inaccessible our country still is 30 years after the ADA and whether or not we can get some targeted investments. So I apologize, that's policy speak. Whether or not we can spend some money to fix those accessibility issues as part of that. I want to shout out Colleen Flanagan had this really good point about imagine how different the landscape would be if we had more disabled people who practice disability justice being elected to local office. I think that's huge. I think that's one of the most important strategic things our movement can do is really encouraging people to start running for office, start small, get involved. It's just, speaking as a policy advocate, it is so much easier to change policy when someone at the table knows what you're talking about and has a personal connection to it. It's not the only kind of advocacy or organizing that matters, but I think it's a tool that we should really lean into. And yeah, I know we're getting late, so I can stop there, but I think there's a lot we can be doing.
Thank you all so much. This is Allie again. So we're gonna open it up to ideally 2 or 3 questions. If one of you can take one question, just so that we can try and have as many folks ask as possible. And in the chat, I put, I'd also like us to first hear from questions from Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian Pacific Islander, and people of color with disabilities. So if you are a white person who has a question, let's pause and hear from our comrades first. So Peter, I'm not sure if you help with this, but let's hear a question.
If you have a question, you should feel free to just bring yourself on video or put your question in the chat. Thanks all.
Awesome, thank you. I see a hand raised. Lou Pancholi, go ahead.
Close enough, everyone. It took me a long time just to pronounce my own name.
Sorry.
But it's okay, it happens. My question is, as a person who's biracial or of mixed race myself, how could we amplify the voices of BIPOC people with disabilities, especially in leadership roles via civic engagement, nonprofits, and especially in government and political representation? I do think there needs to be a significant representation of people with disabilities in all aspects of the political system, not just as a talking point, the voting right. Or, I mean, just to get votes. I mean, there actually has to be a representation of the disability community by people with disabilities themselves. And just one more thing, how could we become more involved with Autistic Self-Advocacy Alliance and the National please tell me I have this right, National Council on Leadership Development for People with Disabilities.
Thanks, Lou, appreciate it. One of y'all want to take 2 or 3 minutes max to answer Lou's question?
Karen, do you want to take this? Like, I feel like a lot of this overlaps with the stuff that NCLD is doing, which I think is in Chicago.
NCLD, sorry. Yeah, I mean, I guess first of all, I would agree with the statement that we absolutely need more representation from the disability standpoint in various levels of government. You know, having served in government, you know, it's tough to get in there. You know, a lot of it, I think, back to a point someone said, a lot of it is relationship building. You know, this is another reason that when I was at the city, I helped start a leadership program called 8825 Advancing Leadership to really lift up and advance opportunities, particularly for disabled people to serve at tables of influence, in positions of influence and power, so that we really are changing that dynamic, because representation of disabled people matters, and so does very much Disability Lens in terms of moving forward our issues. And so, yeah, I mean, and I also clearly saw this too as a big need working on the transition team, is really that need to build the pipeline so that our community can be in various positions within government. So, you know, I would affirm what you said. You know, I would welcome any thoughts that my co-panelists have on their views on, you know, pathways to positions. And I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the second part of your question, was how to get more involved, but I thought—
It's okay, Karen, because I think just with time, that was perfect.
Yeah, okay, so go for it.
Yeah. That touched on a few different things, and Julia put in the chat how to get more involved in the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network.
Great, thank you.
Yep. So next we have friend Goldie Talmadge House. Good to see you.
Thank you. I appreciate the panel today. One thing that was smallly touched on is the internet connection. I myself, as an advocate, have a very poor internet connection, and I work for an agency in the center. So I'm not the only one. So in order for us to get our advocacy out there, we got to figure out how to connect to these individuals. And I'm thinking community centers. We know where our disadvantaged are, and they need to know what BIPOC is. So I'm thinking we should reach to community centers and areas where the demographics are, so they can take this information to their city councils, because we're starting top down. And first thing, we don't have the strong enough internet connection, and people are not getting the information. They're not able to join into our meetings. This is one reason why I like the job that I do, because we could take this information and share it and put it out there. But there are individuals who want to hear this, but are unable to. I think that's a big deal. Thank you.
Oh, okay. No, do you want to ask a question, or are you good? I think, okay, that was just on point truth telling. Thank you so much. Next we have, I'm just looking at the queue, Beth. Or okay, Zoe. Good to see you, Zoe.
Hi, I can't do my video, Allie.
That's okay. Just ask your question. We'd love to hear your question.
No, can I do the video?
You can if you'd like, but we only have a few minutes, so we'd love to hear your question for the panelists.
I have a question for Julia. My question is, so Julia, you said you have brought more power, is that right?
Can you say that question again?
It's Zoe, by the way.
Yep. Hi.
So you said that you used to work in DC, is that right?
Yes, I still work in DC.
Is that your question? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yep, good to hear you.
A lot of incredible organizing happening in DC, as is many places around the country. Thank you, Zoe. So next we have Beth.
Can everyone see and hear me? Hey, thank you everybody for putting this on. And hey, Andrea, and hey to my friend Lori and a couple of other friends on the call. And hey from Nashville, Tennessee. So I'm in a couple of organizing spaces that are not disabled led. And I was just wondering, kind of how do you balance just kind of the desire to organize and co-organize with awesome causes that you believe in that aren't disability centric or called disability something or other, with what I'm sure is just like a constant pressure to educate your comrades in these different organizing spaces.
Andrea, do you have any thoughts for Beth?
Yes, hey Beth. Beth and I went to school together.
Whoa!
College together. So yeah, I mean, we find that's consistent, and I think that at some level there's a personal choice and a personal kind of decision about who I'm going to be in this space, because it does often feel like, man, I'm the only disabled person here. And I mean, obviously, and this is like the experience of any, person with multiple identities, right? Like Black people in a disabled space. And like, what do I bring up here? So I think that, when it comes to disability in spaces like that, what I find, I think it depends on the openness of the leadership, and also the method by which you're convening. So whether that's, if it's better to bring it up kind of on an individual basis by email, I think it's always just the dynamics of the organization. But I would say also, like, it's hard, but I've had to really make decisions about either deciding where I want to be or determining if I'm going to be the disability advocate in the space, quite honestly, because it's hard to just, you just want to be, and you care about the environment, and like to be on all the time, like we shouldn't have to be, quite honestly. So I really think that it's just important to like kind of decide, even perhaps going in, who you're going to, who you want to be. So that's my kind of personal experience. But Karen, I see your mic off. So yeah.
Well, unfortunately, sorry, y'all. I just want to honor everyone's time, and we are 2 minutes to at least 11 a.m. Pacific time over here. And so I'm going to have to ask that we kind of say to be continued, and just to thank Julia, Karen, and Andrea for your time this morning, and for everyone who's tuned in. And if there's anything about community organizing, is building connections with each other. So, I just want to invite all of us to think about who we want to build connections with, and who may not know that disability communities exist, but that they're already a part of the community but don't know it yet. and that we can be building power together. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jessica to close us out, and wishing you all just safety and connectedness during this time.
Oops. Thank you so much, all. I'm going to wrap up pretty quickly because I realize we're at the hour. Thank you so much to Allie Cannington for filling in as an amazing facilitator, and huge thanks to Julia, Karen, and Andrea. We are so honored to have been able to hear from you today. You know, we've talked about balancing the time of the Organizers Forum between hearing from speakers and having a chance to build those relationships that you all were just talking about. And so I'm wondering, so this Organizers Forum got delayed. Our regular time is the third Tuesday of each month, which would be February 16th. And I wonder if people are interested, we could meet then and not have speakers and just do some follow-up and have time to connect with each other about what do we think and how can we be doing this work together, and how can we support each other to be effective. Okay, I'm seeing a few comments in the chat. So that's gonna happen. If you have ideas for future Organizers Forum, let me know. It's Tuesday, February 16th. It'll be the same time, 10 to 11 Pacific, 1 to 2 Eastern. I won't try to say the middle of the country because I'll get it wrong. So thank you also to our, is it the same link? I believe so. I will check and I will send that out. And thank you to our captioner and our ASL interpreters and to everyone for participating. You can look for this video on the SD Action, sdaction.org. That's the SDA website in the next few days, and it should be available. So thank you so much. Take care and take action. Goodbye, everyone.